Now that you all are experts in photosynthesis, we are now going to transition and move into talking about cellular respiration. Okay. Hopefully, you all are well aware that plants do photosynthesis, only plants can. But when we're talking about cellular respiration, we're talking about all organisms. So, plants and animal cells perform cellular respiration. We all do it. Okay. So let's just go back and remember photosynthesis, like all those steps, all those things, but like what was the point overall? What was happening? Like, why does a plant want to go through all of that work to do photosynthesis? And the answer is to make glucose. Okay, remember glucose is C6H12O6, but just FYI, here it is. Like, do you have to memorize that? No, but there you go. So the whole point of photosynthesis is a plant is making glucose, right? Because plants are autotrophs. Remember this? So they are feeding themselves by making their own glucose. Whereas us, we're heterotrophs. We can't make our own glucose, so we need to eat things that made glucose, okay? Or eat things that ate things that make glucose, right? And remember, here's our overall equation. Energy plus carbon dioxide and water makes glucose and oxygen. Okay, cool. So we've got an organism that has glucose, either because it's a plant and it made it through photosynthesis, or because like we ate a plant. And now what? I got this glucose, and apparently that feeds me and gives me energy, but like, how? What? This whole process of how glucose becomes energy is called cellular respiration, okay? And it is a multi-step series of reactions, all led by enzymes, of course, that are going to take glucose and convert it into energy. Okay, that is the overall idea. We're taking that sugar that was produced and we're going to turn that sugar into energy. Here's the reaction for cellular respiration. Now, one thing to note is that when I talk about cellular respiration right now, I'm talking about aerobic respiration in the presence of oxygen. Later, we'll talk about what happens if oxygen isn't present, but for right now, for this whole lecture, from now on, unless otherwise specified, oxygen is present. And check out this equation, y'all. What do you notice? Because you should notice something. It's the reverse of photosynthesis. Check it out. Glucose plus oxygen makes CO2, water, and energy. What? Energy, CO2, water makes glucose and oxygen. They are the exact same, but in reverse. Cool beans. Okay. So we're going to keep things pretty general in this lecture, or as general as I can, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty that you need to know actually in class by drawing some things out. But overall here, we're going to take the glucose made by plant cells, and we're going to break it down step by step to create energy. And of course, cellular energy, as we know, is ATP. And then ATP can be used to do all kinds of things, right? Chemical work, mechanical work, transport work, all of those things. Where does this happen? Our good friend, the mitochondria. Remember, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. That's like the one thing everyone remembers. Yeah, this is why we're getting into it right now. Okay, so cellular respiration takes place right outside the mitochondria in the cytoplasm and then inside the mitochondria. It's going to happen in 4 steps. Okay, and we're going to go through these 4 steps together in class. In order to make these 4 steps make sense, I want to talk about some bigger overall concepts before we get into the specifics, okay? In cellular respiration, important things are going to be glucose and oxygen. ATP, right? We're trying to make ATP, that's the point. We're also going to see these things, NADH and FADH2, come up. Okay, these things are electron carriers. And if you remember back to photosynthesis, we've already seen an electron carrier before, right? In photosynthesis, we had that NAD plus and H plus. Remember NADP reductase that made NADPH and it went and dumped those electrons in the Calvin cycle? Remember? You're like, I'm trying to not remember. I know. Okay, so that was our electron carrier there. But in cellular respiration, we have 2. Notice how diabolically similar they are. NADPH and NADH. So close, yet different. But same overall idea. we're going to gain 2 electrons to form NADH, and then we've got this other one where an FAD and 2 hydrogen ions are going to gain some electrons. So the idea here is these things are electron carriers that are going to take electrons from one place and dump them somewhere else. So when you see this come up in class, now you'll know what we're talking about. And then the other big player is going to be ATP. Now you all, hopefully by this point in time, are very familiar with ATP, but I just want to revisit it, okay? In photosynthesis, ATP is formed through hydrogen ions moving through ATP synthase, okay? And this is called photophosphorylation because we're phosphorylating the ADP, and light is what drove the whole thing, hence the photo, okay? And this is, remember, chemiosmosis, hydrogen ions creating ATP, okay? So this is how ATP has been formed. This is how we learned about it in photosynthesis. In cellular respiration, we're going to see some similar stuff going on. In cellular respiration, we also have ATP formed through hydrogen ions moving through ATP synthase, okay? We're still getting ADP phosphorylated by inorganic phosphate. Again, the hydrogen's still moving through. As it turns out, as we'll learn, they're moving in the opposite direction. Okay, they're going to be moving in instead of out, but still it's a hydrogen gradient. And this is not photophosphorylation because there's no light here. This type of phosphorylation is called oxidative phosphorylation, and we'll talk about why later. But again, this is still chemiosmosis because we're making ATP with hydrogen ions going through an ATP synthase. Okay, so this is all very, very similar so far in how we're making ATP. There's one other way to make ATP that we haven't learned about yet, and this is found in cellular respiration, and it's called substrate level phosphorylation. Now we know what a substrate is, right? It's something that goes into an enzyme. And we know what phosphorylation is. It's when something gets a phosphate group attached to it. So substrate level phosphorylation is when ADP goes into the active site and some other substrate goes in there with it. And what happens is this enzyme takes this P, rips it off the substrate, pops it onto ADP, which makes an ATP. So the difference here is the P that ATP gets isn't a free-floating inorganic phosphate. It was snatched off of a substrate. So that is substrate level phosphorylation. So cellular respiration makes it with ATP synthase and also makes ATP with substrate level phosphorylation. Overall, these are the steps. We're not going to get into too much of it right now, but we're going to start with this glycolysis, which is going to make some of this NADH stuff and some ATP. This is happening in the cytoplasm. We're going to move into the mitochondria where a bunch of stuff happens. Whoa, we're going to get into it. We're going to make some NADH. We're going to make some FADH2. We're going to produce some ATP. And then bam, down here, holy cannoli, look at all that ATP. At the end, we're going to produce about 30 to 32 molecules of glucose. That's right, 30 to 32 of molecules of ATP per glucose. That's a lot. Here's some more diagrams of what we're going to get into tomorrow, okay? But that's the overall overview of cellular respiration. So overall, we're taking glucose, we're breaking it down to form energy for the cells to use. That energy is ATP. We're going to use these two guys as electron carriers. This is going to happen in the cytoplasm of the cell, again, plant cell or animal cell. And then part of it's going to happen inside the actual mitochondria itself. Here's our chemical equation. Again, the reverse of photosynthesis. We have ATP made through substrate phosphorylation or oxidative phosphorylation. Now, I'm going to bend your brain for just a second. Stick with me. Glucose, if you were to break all the bonds in between all the carbons and all the oxygens and all the hydrogens in glucose, it will release 686 kilocalories per mole. Okay, if we were to just break all those bonds, great. All right. ATP, when you snap off a P from ATP, that releases 7.3 kilocalories per mole. And we make 32 ATPs in cellular respiration. So let's figure out our energy efficiency here. If each ATP makes 7.3 kilocalories and I make 32, how many kilocalories is my ATP going to give me? 7.3 times 32 is 233.6. But I just told you that if I snap all of the bonds in glucose, That gives me 686. So if I can make 233 from all that ATP, but glucose can give me 686, that means I'm only converting like 34% of glucose's energy into ATP. Yikes. That doesn't sound very good. It's actually huge. This is the most efficient process like in cells. Okay. A car engine, for example, only converts 25% of the energy in gasoline to actual usable energy. Yeah. So we're talking like 66% of the energy is quote unquote lost or not converted. So where does it go? As it turns out, the rest is lost to heat. It gets lost to heat. All these reactions are not fully efficient. It gets lost to heat, which is great for us because we have to generate our own body heat. So that's going to end up being really important for us that not all of that energy does get converted. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. But I want you to understand that some of glucose's energy is directly turned into ATP. Some of the energy gets lost to heat, but this ends up actually being a very, very efficient process. It doesn't seem like it, but this is the most efficient that we get. So overall things for you to know and understand by the end of this lecture are listed here. And here's where we are in the book. And in class soon, we will be drawing out the process in a little bit more detail.